And now that we are done talking about the PFL and Bellator, we will jump into UFC Saudi Arabia, the first ever UFC event to be held in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And it will feature the former middleweight champion of the world, Bobby Knuckles, Robert Whittaker, the current number 3 ranked middleweight. He's taking on not the undefeated Khamzat Chimaev, but the short notice replacement who was supposed to fight last weekend, Ikram Aliskerov, whose only loss, funny enough, has come to Khamzat Chimaev. Let's talk about that huge fight at middleweight and the rest of the card because it's a pretty solid debut for the UFC over in Saudi Arabia. It still blows my mind that Robert Whittaker has had 32 professional fights, over half of those in the UFC, been a champion, fought numerous former or present champions, and he is only 33 years old. Not to mention, he was on The Ultimate Fighter at 170 pounds many, many years ago, yet he is in his physical prime, as a lot of people would say. 25 wins, 7 losses. He's coming off most recently a unanimous decision victory over Paulo Costa, former title challenger, back in February at UFC 298. And before that, lost to now middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis. He got knocked out at International Fight Week last July in the second round. So Bobby Knuckles will look to make it 2 straight victories in 3 of his last 4, and maybe get a crack at another middleweight championship fight. To do so, he will not have to go through Khamzat Chimaev anymore. As we talked about previously on the channel, Khamzat Chimaev was pulled out of this fight late last week. I'm recording this on Wednesday, June 19th. He got pulled late last week. It seems to be food poisoning that put him down for the count in the hospital. I'm sure it was brutal. And to ask him to then, come out of the hospital when he had probably been pooping, puking, and on IVs to rehydrate his body, to have him come over to Saudi Arabia and cut weight for the biggest fight of his career, you can't really expect him to do that. So he was pulled from this card. Hopefully he can recover and get a fight in before the end of the year. Everyone is always tuning in and ready to watch a Khamzat Chimaev fight, especially one that was going to be of this magnitude. But nevertheless, former Khamzat Chimaev opponent Ikram Aliskerov answered the call. He was supposed to fight last week. Instead, he will look to travel to Saudi Arabia in what is just his third ever UFC fight against the third ranked Robert Whittaker. Ikram is 31 years old, entering his prime, maybe some would say in his prime, 15 victories, only 1 defeat, 11 of those 15 wins are by stoppage, including all 3 under the UFC banner. He was a Dana White Contender Series alum in 2022 and debuted against Phil Hall as a seasoned veteran, knocked him out in 2 minutes, and then followed it up with beating Warlley Alves in the first round with a flying knee knockout. That happened in October of last year. So his first fight in, what is that, like 8 or 9 months now? So a decent amount of time to rest up and get a big fight, but he definitely wasn't expecting it to be against former champion Robert Whittaker. What a story this would be for Ikram to replace the only man that's ever beat him, take that spot from him, get the victory from him, and launch himself into not only title contention, but maybe even, depending on the fashion of victory, a title shot. I think a lot of people were viewing the Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev matchup as a number 1 contender fight. Obviously, Robert Whittaker would have extended his win streak. The pedigree of opponents that he has beaten is second to none in this weight class. And for Khamzat, undefeated phenom. I don't even think he's 30 years old yet. A plethora of stoppages and crazy fights in the UFC. That would have been the biggest spot of his career, and had he won it, I think he was a shoo-in for the middleweight title fight. And I think the reason that the UFC went ahead and quickly thereafter announced Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis for the title shot is because of that very reason, Khamzat Chimaev being pulled from this card. I think they were just like, well, it's all right. Let's just give Izzy the shot now, and we can still maybe give the winner of Whittaker versus Aliskerov the next shot. And kudos to both of these guys for accepting this fight. Obviously, of course, Aliskerov was in Vegas. He was going to fight on an Apex fight card and then has to fly all the way across the world and fight a former champion on a week's notice. But it's kind of little to lose, a whole lot to gain for Ikram Aliskerov. But for Robert Whittaker, it's the complete opposite, if you ask me, because he's giving up his name, his recognition, and his number 3 spot in the rankings to fight someone with only 2 UFC fights, no victories over a ranked opponent. I mean, that is putting it all on the line for Bobby Knuckles. So, shout out to both of these warriors for accepting this fight, for saving this card. This is going to be, I think, a very, very enticing, intriguing banger, dare I say, of a main event. I think with all of the headlines, all of the storylines, all of the momentum from Ikram, the momentum that seems to be on the side of Whittaker with the anyone, anytime mindset, I don't think we're going to see 25 minutes here. I think someone's going to get a very convincing finish. And I'll tell you what, there are some big stakes in the co-main event as well, because we see the number 3 ranked Sergei Pavlovich coming off of his loss last November for the interim heavyweight championship against Tom Aspinall. He is returning to face Alexander Volkov, the number 5 ranked heavyweight, who is finally looking to crack into true title contention and maybe even get his first ever UFC title shot. We all know about the danger that the 32-year-old Sergei Pavlovich possesses. 18 victories, 2 defeats, only 3 fights have gone the distance. Every other fight in his career has been via KO, TKO. As I said, he's coming off of that loss, knockout loss to Tom Aspinall in November. But prior to that, he had won 6 straight fights in the UFC, all 6 via first round finish. We saw him debut back in November of 2018 against Alistair Overeem, a former UFC title challenger. If that doesn't show you how high the UFC was on Pavlovich way back nearly 6 years ago, I don't know what will. He took a little bit of time off and then bounced back and didn't look back since until his first loss in that span came to Aspinall. So he's looking to bounce back, get back to the win column, and right back in to title contention. In the 47 fight veteran, former Bellator heavyweight champion Alexander Volkov has looked the best he's ever looked, dare I say, in the UFC. He's going to be coming into this fight against Pavlovich on a 3-fight, not only win streak, but finishing streak. His last loss came to Tom Aspinall in March of 2022, over 2 years ago. Since then, he has beaten Jairzinho Rozenstruik, Alexander Romanov, and Tai Tuivasa. Let us not forget, he beat Tai Tuivasa with an Ezekiel choke, by the way, something that was definitely not on my Alexander Volkov bingo board. So this is a big fight. Volkov can win his 4th straight, coming off of the loss to the now interim champion Tom Aspinall, who's fighting at the end of July. Volkov, I think, can really solidify himself as next in line for a title shot. I know we don't know what's going on with Stipe and John Jones, so I'm just going to view this as a potential number 1 contender fight, to be quite honest with you. Especially when you consider Ciryl Gane is saying no and filming a movie right now. It doesn't seem that he's in the driver's seat for anything right now. Pavlovich, yes, is coming off of a loss to Aspinall, but if he bounces back here and finishes Volkov, who's on a 4-fight win or a 3-fight win streak, he could very well just get another shot at the title, whether it be a rematch with Tom or a brand new fight with Curtis Blades. We also have a fight that, in my opinion, seems to be flying under the radar, and I know there's like nearly 40 fights between the PFL, UFC, and Bellator this weekend, but we have Kelvin Gastelum taking on Daniel Rodriguez. Here's the crazy stat of the day for you all. Kelvin Gastelum will enter this fight in Saudi Arabia having lost 6 of his last 8 fights. However, he did get a victory in 2023, a very, very close back and forth war with Chris Curtis in April. He then fought at the end of the year against Sean Brady in, I believe, Austin, Texas. He got submitted via Kimura in the 3rd round. Sean Brady, a very fast-rising, promising prospect, only lost to Bilal Muhammad, who's now challenging for a title against Leon Edwards in July. So Sean Brady, discussion for another day, but he's pretty damn good. I mean, you look at the level of competition. I bring that stat to you. losing 6 of his last 8, Gastelum, but the names: Sean Brady, Jared Cannonier, Robert Whittaker, Jack Hermanson, Darren Till, Israel Adesanya for an interim title dating back to 2019. So they are all top-level fighters. This one against Daniel Rodriguez promises to deliver, if you ask me. And for what it's worth, Daniel Rodriguez is coming into this fight on a 2-fight losing streak, a 2-fight stoppage losing streak. He got submitted by Neil Magny in November of 2022, only fought once in 2023, and he got knocked out by Ian Gary. Still the biggest victory of Ian Gary's career in the UFC, in my opinion, if we're talking fashion in which he did it. And then I believe he had tested positive for a banned substance, so he had to serve a suspension throughout the remainder of 2023. That is why he's now on a 13-month hiatus, but he is returning. And I'm going to be honest, yes, he's lost 2 fights in a row, but prior to that, he was on a 4-fight win streak. Very, very, very good performances during that win streak. Now, Daniel is 37 years old, so obviously time is not on his side. At 17-4, he can still bounce back, though, if you ask me, and it could be against Kelvin Gastelum. The line is what throws me off with this fight. Yeah, I get it. D-Rod's lost 2 in a row, but as I've already said with Kelvin, his losing ways as of late, Kelvin Gastelum's like a minus 250 or more favorite. D-Rod on the comeback on most books at plus 200. I don't know about that line, and for that reason alone, I may find myself betting on Rodriguez this weekend. Nevertheless, don't sleep on this one. We have 2 top 10 light heavyweights, Johnny Walker and former title challenger Volkan Oezdemir, fighting one another. This should be a very, very interesting, violent fight. Johnny Walker coming off of his duo of fights with Magomed Ankalaev, one in October that ended in a no contest. The other was the first event of 2024 where he got knocked out in the second round by Ankalaev. Prior to that, Johnny Walker had a bit of a resurgence after losing a few back in 2020, 2021, 2022. He had finished Paul Craig, Jan Kudalaba, and beaten Anthony Smith. So he's still in that area. I'd say a win here puts him back into like elite company. I believe he's number 7 coming into this. Volkan number 9. Volkan's coming off of a victory over Bogdan Guskov. And no, it wasn't by a knockout. He actually got a submission victory. That was in September of 2023. So it's been a little bit since we've seen No Time Oezdemir, but he's won 2 of his last 3 fights. These guys are fighting to enter into the top 5, edge closer to a light heavyweight title shot. We also have Nasrat Haqparast taking on Jared Gordon and Hanat Fakhretdinov versus Nicolas Dalby. So there are some very, very intriguing matchups for this debut card for the UFC in Saudi Arabia. Please let me know all of your predictions for the main event, the short notice scramble of a main event that we got, and everything else down below. If you enjoyed this preview, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new so you never miss my previews every single week of the biggest storylines and what is at stake in all of the best fights. I also recap the most meaningful results every week and give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can join the community on social media at the BAJ MMA and follow along on your favorite audio platforms such as Spotify and Apple. Audio podcast episodes will release every Friday and Monday. You can check those out there. Have a great weekend. Enjoy this weekend full of fights with the UFC, PFL, and Bellator, and I will see you in the next video.